Hi guys, John from LookSmart Home Inspections right here in New Jersey. And today I want to talk to you briefly about things that home inspectors don't cover in a house. Now it's true, good home inspectors are going to cover the majority of the systems, components, and structures in a home, for sure, right? But there are certain things that we just can't do. We're not allowed to do. Take, for example, we know that a home inspection is a non-invasive visual inspection of the various aspects, components, and systems of a home, right? We've covered that in a previous video. But there are certain things that we can't do. And one of those things is to open walls and do invasive destructive testing. So no seller of a house is going to allow a home inspector to say open drywall or remove a ceiling or things like that. So that's something that we have limitations on. So if there's defects behind the walls, we're not going to be able to describe those. We're not going to be able to most likely see those unless there is evidence of that defect. So say there's a water leak behind a wall cavity and there is some evidence of water staining down at, say, a baseboard area. Well, then there we can visually see that, document that, explain the problem, but we can't determine the extent of the problem that lies behind the walls. So that is a limitation that we do have. So the home inspection is like a snapshot in time. We're there at the property for, say, 3 hours or so, and we're giving you a snapshot of the conditions that exist at the time that we're doing the home inspection. Like, we don't dismantle equipment either. So we're not HVAC technicians, boiler heating technicians. We're none of that. We're not going to take apart your equipment in house. We're not going to open your boiler per se. We're going to take the cover off the front, but we're not going to dismantle it to check for components, dismantle the heat exchanger and things like that. We're not going to go and do that kind of invasive kind of, dismantling of equipment. The same thing with your air conditioning and heating, right? We do take the cover off the main electrical service panel and any sub panels, that are accessible. We do that, but we're not going in there dismantling breakers and things. So I just kind of want to give you guys an idea of what home inspectors can do and can't do, because we don't want to cause any damages or problems in home. We're not licensed electrical contractors, heating contractors, HVAC, things like that. So there are for sure limitations. Also on a home inspection, we're not going to be checking take for example, your central vacuum system. Although I like to do that if I can find the hose or hoses for the system, I do like to do that, but we're not required to do that. We're not going to be able to check your dehumidification system in a house or your humidification system in a home. Although I'll go ahead and explain those systems and how they work, but we're not allowed to actually test those. We're not going to be able to tell you, if they're working or not. And then certainly if they're in really poor condition, we're going to describe that to you and document that, certainly in the home inspection report. We're not going to be able to go into any areas that are unsafe. Say you have a crawl space that we can get into, but there's a lot of asbestos material hanging off the piping in the crawl space. Well, that's considered an unsafe condition for us, and we're not going to be able to go ahead in there safely and report on any conditions unless you have an asbestos abatement and make that area safe for us to go ahead and traverse. The same thing is true if there's standing water, say, in an area of a crawl space. That would be an unsafe condition. Or say electrical wiring that is loose and hanging in a crawl space. We can't get into spaces that we just can't get into. So if a space is very, very narrow and tight, it's really unsafe for us to try to navigate and crawl into that space. We want to make sure that, we can get out of that space. So be careful when you're buying homes with those kind of spaces, because your home inspector is unlikely really to be able to get into those really small and tight, narrow spaces. Although we do our best to try to do that, because we want to give you the most information that we possibly can about, the house that you're buying here, right? So we're not going to also be able to take for example, like irrigation systems or sprinkler systems, things like that. We're not going to be able to open your well head if you have a well. We're not going to be able to tell you how that well casing looks. It's just something that we're just not allowed to do. There's other, specialty inspectors that would go ahead and do that. Take, for example, examine your well, or examine your septic, or your, below ground oil tank if you have one on the property that you want to get it tested. That's something that we just, don't do. We can't do those kind of things. Although some of us, there are some home inspectors who do oil tank location services. I wouldn't recommend that. That's a previous visit. That's a previous video, actually. Because you want to have somebody look at that oil tank that does that all day, every day as a consistent business, who has the right insurance to cover you in the event of something goes wrong. But that's just an aside. Anyway, so there are certain things that home inspectors are not going to be able to inspect for. Another example would be, say, an alarm system, or burglar system, or fire detection system. We're not going to be able to turn those on, inside the home. Anything that's low voltage wiring, like intercoms and, cameras, and you see cameras all over the place today, we're not going to be able to do that either. So this kind of gives you just a flavor of, a home inspection is a very, very thorough inspection of the house, but there are some certain limitations, and you should just be aware of those limitations. So if you have if you're buying a house and there's certain equipment in the home that you're unsure of, and you want to ask your home inspector, hey, do you do this? Is this part of the New Jersey home inspection regulations, is to look at these systems? And that home inspector would certainly be able to tell you, hey, yeah, that's under the guidelines. We're going to be looking at that. Another example is solar. Like, I go to so many houses now that have solar, and it's something that we just can't inspect. We can't test for that kind of thing. Also, generators. We're not allowed to turn that generator onto generator power, just in case we cause a problem in the house. We don't want to cause issues, in the home for the, the person who owns the home or selling the home. So that's really best left to a electrical contractor, is to test that generator in the house, and to test the, the solar that's in the home. So please be aware, home inspections we provide a lot of thorough information, but there are just some limitations. And if you're buying a house here in New Jersey, you should understand some of those limitations, so you're not surprised at the time of the home inspection. Also, some of those limitations will be described in the pre-inspection agreement that we all send out to you guys before going to the home inspection, right? So you'll get a pre-inspection agreement that states what we do and what we don't do. So read that. A lot of you don't read that, but you should read that just to understand some of these limitations. Thanks for listening. It's John from LookSmart Home Inspections right here in New Jersey. Reach out if you have any home inspection questions.